Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Journal for Out of the Abyss 5th edition D&D campaign. I'm Anthony, and yeah, we're going to kind of keep on keeping on with the story of my party of adventurers traveling through the Underdark, trying to escape back into the surface after getting out of drow captivity. So I think this is episode 4, I believe, and I think it might be a shorter video today, just because the session was somewhat as I expected, just a little bit more of a combat grind than anything. To give you a quick update, when we last left off, the party had just escaped the Kuatoa kind of fishing village of Sloopludat. And the way that had happened is that as they were about to be sacrificed, or faux sacrificed, depending on how you look at it, to the Deep Father, which realistically just wound up actually being Demogorgon, they were about to be sacrificed, and instead the kind of arch rival who worshipped the Sea Mother kind of threw the coup, and everyone went into combat, and during that combat there was so much blood that was shed that eventually Demogorgon actually did come out of the water off the coast of this village and just started laying waste, just Godzilla style. You know, he's like 30 feet tall, and he's coming out of the water, and he's, you know, the demon prince of the abyss, and he's the, you know, the patron demon of madness kind of thing. So it was chaos. It was pandemonium. People were screaming and running around, and all the Kuatoa just threw themselves to their knees and started worshiping. And the adventurers were like, well, this is our chance to go. So when we left them, they had just managed to fight their way out of some, you know, crazed Kuatoa interceptors, jumped on a couple of keel boats, which are kind of like, you know, dinghies or large dinghies. They can seat about 6 people each, and I think that with their NPCs they have with them right now, the total party size is 11, with 5 player characters. So they had just gotten onto boats and kind of cut ties to the docks and were taking off. So that's where we picked up again last night. And to kind of give you that quick update again, this was actually our first time where we got to play with a full party. You know, I had always, you know, it was my original intent to have a party of 4 players. It wound up being 5 players, and then we just kind of stuck with it because everyone was having a good time, and it didn't seem to throw things out of whack too much, so I was fine with that. And last night was the first session out of 4 where everyone was able to attend. So we had Uta, the Turtle Monk. We had Ken LaFlaunt, the Half-Elf Bard. We had Colby Jack, the Half-Elf Warlock. We had Bard, the Half-Orc Barbarian. And we had Sir Robert Bastian, the Human Paladin. And so everyone was all together in these 2 kind of dinghies. And the way that I wanted to start the session off today, for a couple different, well, no, realistically just for one reason, is I wanted to make sure that we had a really nice role-playing element to start with. So I said, well, look, you know, each day you're able to kind of travel for about 8 hours. And also a long rest is about 8 hours, and you've just come out of combat. So we're going to say that you guys, you know, that they all get a long rest, and so you know, regain your hit points and get your spell slots back if you use them, and all that jazz. But you know, also you're not just sleeping on these boats for 8 hours. You're kind of taking it on and off in shifts. To row the boats, because there's no wind in the Underdark, so it's pretty much just rowing or swimming. So they're rowing the boats, taking in shifts. I think the Bard, Ken, had actually said he was using Mage Hand to kind of act as a small outboard motor to help them along, so that was kind of fun. But yeah, so I said, so while you're doing this, you have an opportunity now as you cruise down the Darklake. You know, the Dark Elves, the Drow from Velkenvelve, where they originally escaped from, has kind of been dogging them along their escape, catching up with them once to almost fatal effect. And so they were a little bit safer in Sloopludat. The Drow wouldn't go into the Kuatoa village for a couple different reasons. And then there was the chaos and their escape on the Darklake, and you know, it's very difficult to obviously, you know, track someone over water. So they had a bit of a respite from that, and so I said, here's a good opportunity for you guys just to engage in some good role play. You've known each other for almost 2 weeks of in-game time now, if not more, and this is an opportunity to talk to each other, talk to the NPCs, flesh out your characters, flesh out your relationships, and I had actually said this to them a few days before our session, so that if there was anything they wanted to prep or any more of their backstory they wanted to flesh out before heading into this, that they had a chance to do so. So that's what we did, and we started off, and it was pretty good. Some of the dynamics continued to develop. They got to know some of the NPCs a little bit more. Nothing crazy of note that I'm going to go into too much, but we learned a little bit more about how the half-orc bard was kind of tricked into going into the Underdark and being captured, and Sir Robert Bastian, his noble family, was actually betrayed by a family friend, and he had heard rumors that this guy had retreated into the Underdark and come down here to find him, and his entire party was slayed except for him, and he was captured by the Drow. Ken, I don't know if I had mentioned this before, but Ken LaFlaunt talks to this ghost, the ghost of his dead wife, who I'm kind of blanking on her name right now, but it starts with a G. It might be Gabrielle or something like that. But he talks to this ghost, and no one else can see her. No one else can talk to her. And from a flavor perspective, from a narrative perspective, the idea is like, we don't even know if there actually is a ghost or if he's just nutty, especially because they found him after the first session, just kind of wandering around naked in the Underdark as like a previous escaped slave. So we kind of learned just a little bit more about the fact that he has been spending all of his time wandering around in the Underdark for a long time by himself. In terms of other things that we found out, our warlock is also kind of like almost like a merchant prince, like a trader extraordinaire, and maybe a minor alcoholic. And then Utah was kind of fun because the player role plays his character so that there's an irony to him where he is like a tortoise person. So your first thought is, well, he's very slow, but then he's a monk and he's got like decent move because of that. So he's actually quite fast physically, but then when he speaks, it sounds like this. And sometimes a character will ask him a question, and the player will just kind of stare at them until it's somewhat uncomfortable, and roleplay continues. And then a minute after that, Utah will answer the question. Like, it almost takes him that long to catch up with it. So that was kind of fun as well. And he just spoke about how he's just kind of like a restless spirit almost. Like, he's a world traveler, and he's, trained and discovered much through his traveling. So it was nice to get some of that roleplay element. And then the session after that realistically just consisted of I think it was like a 14-day journey over the Darklake, guided by their kind of new Duergar NPC named Hemeth, who was a deep dwarf that was already captured and kind of prepped for sacrifice in the Kuatoa village. They freed him so he could help them in the fight to escape, and he's with them now. And they're actually really lucky that they made that choice, because in terms of navigating the Darklake without getting lost, your best bet is a Kuatoa, which they had one in their party, and he's gone now. He basically was taken out during the carnage of Demogorgon attacking Sloopludaw. And so that was really unfortunate. And then your next best bet is a Duergar. And they don't know the waters as well as the Kuatoa, but they have kind of made it a point to map them and know how to travel them. And during their conversation with Hemeth, on the boats, they found out about him that he was actually he's an arms dealer, and you heard about the kind of civil war that was happening in Sloopludaw, and so he had traveled there to kind of try and double sell weapons, and for his trouble he was basically captured and was going to be sacrificed. So he is actively acting as their guide on the Darklake to guide them to Gracklestugh, which is the deep dwarf, one of the deep dwarf main cities. Big city, big industry. It's known as the City of Blades. And after some debate at the end of last session, that's where the characters decided, let's go there, especially because our warlock companion here, Colby, may have some mercantile connections in this giant city that could help us out. So that was their, and Hemeth really wanted to go there as well, even though Sereth is still kind of being like, well, I don't know that we should do that. the Deep Dwarves are kind of, you know, like not insane, like nutty, but they're meta wise, their alignment is lawful evil. So they have laws, but their laws are incredibly strict, and like, you know, they could catch you for stealing and just execute you on the spot. Excuse me. So you know, he had some reservations, and of course Jim Jar, the deep gnome, had some reservations, but they ultimately decided Gracklestugh was the way to go. So Hemeth said, "Yeah, that's going to be about 14 days, you know, on the Darklake, kind of navigating along." So that's what they did, and that's what most of the session was. We ended not quite making it to Gracklestugh, but they should make it there next time 100%, with maybe even some play that happens in Gracklestugh. So I had rolled up some random encounters for them through the book, through the Out of the Abyss campaign book, to encounter. And there was a nice mix of kind of, you know, terrain and monsters and terrain. So their first encounter was with a couple of Miro, I believe. And Miro they're like mer people, right? But the story behind them is that Miro are mer people who at some point in time discovered an idol to Demogorgon and took it back and started worshipping it and tried to open a door into the abyss, and they eventually succeeded. And you know, this leader led him and his people through the portal into the abyss, where they were basically, you know, tortured and toiled and warped over time into the Miro. So physically they have like the bottom of a mermaid, but their top half is like a sea dragon. You know, they have arms and they have like harpoon weapons and that kind of thing, but their face is like a water dragon. So a couple of them kind of ambushed them during their journey. So they fought, and that was interesting because we have a couple characters who don't really wear armor, and so have an easier time swimming than others. So I think realistically in this scenario, Uta jumped in the water and just kind of swam over and started beating one with his stick, his like staff, his bow staff, and getting, you know, his free punch in and that type of thing because he's a monk. And then what I didn't expect, because I didn't actually know that they held these, is that what a lot of DMs who run this adventure actually don't let their characters do, but you know, it worked out in such a way that my characters, my party, in their escape from Velkaville, had an opportunity to get into both the armory and the chest in like the main priestess's chambers to claim their starting equipment that would have been confiscated from them. So I mean, they don't have anything spectacular, but they're well equipped in terms of they have everything that they would want to have, with the exception of, you know, food and rations, and we'll get to that in a second. And actually, now that I'm saying that, this wasn't the first encounter, this was the second, but I'll just backtrack in a minute. So they fought these Miro, and Uta jumps in the water, and then the barbarian, the half-orc barbarian Bard, and Sir Robert have like 4 or 5 javelins apiece. So they just stayed on the boats and started, you know, whipping javelins at these Miro, who were fighting the monk. And the warlock and the bard basically sat in the boat and either spell sniped, if you're the warlock, or kind of did buffing and healing as the bard. So it was really good. It was nice to see the party really work together as a team. You know, not that they haven't been, but it was just a great example of them working together as a team. And so they fairly easily dealt with that. There wasn't anything too nasty that happened. Maybe in hindsight, I should have thrown extra enemies in there, but it was fine. You know, it was a good combat. Prior to that, actually, the first encounter was that they ran into another keel boat. And the keel boat had 2 Kuo-toa on it who had also escaped the carnage of Sloop-Ludop. And, you know, I described to them that out of the darkness, they see this other keel boat, and they see 2 Kuo-toa kind of bickering back and forth with themselves and what seems to be like a third person, but they can't see a third person. So eventually they kind of do the whole like, oh, ahoy, like who's that, who's there? And they gain pace with the Kuo-toa boat, and they have a brief interaction with them. And what they found is that, you know, they were talking to this third person referred to as Quillis. And Quillis, they couldn't see, and Quillis never said anything, but one of the Kuo-toa kind of kept turning around and saying, "Oh, yes, yes, Quilla. So you're absolutely right," and come back with a question or a reason why they should get going or whatever. And so what the characters didn't find out, but I'm always more than happy to reveal some more of the backstory in these little videos because it doesn't really matter anymore, and it's always fun for the players that are playing with me, I think, to watch these and get a peek behind the scenes without revealing anything. But essentially, the Kuatoa in that boat had been driven mad by the Demogorgon's appearance. And they had basically like an imaginary friend that they trusted more than anyone else, and no one else could see them. They didn't exist. So the whole time, the characters were like, well, why don't you come with us? We're more than happy to have you along, especially because they're traveling on basically a fishing boat. They're full of fishing gear, and the players need resources. They have no food basically. So and in a response to that, I was like, oh, maybe we could do that. What's that, Quillis? You know what? Yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely, no, we can't. We can't do that. In fact, we should be going. We should be going, and we're sorry. And they basically said, but if I can't remember how the exchange came about, but essentially there was an agreement that if you sell us some, like we'll sell you some of this fishing gear if you want, and we can let you do that. And the player characters are good with that. But again, they're crazy, and everything in the Underdark is supposed to be kind of hard. And normally fishing gear is like a gold piece. And I think the Kuatoa said, well, give us 4 gold. And then the characters argued them down to 3 gold, which, they did get a good amount of treasure from one of their encounters or by looting in the Kuatoa village. So for them it was a little bit of a drop in the bucket, but it was still like a 3 or 4 times upcharge from what it was supposed to be. But it was fine. So they got it, and then every day I said, well, there's enough fishing gear for 3 of you guys to fish, and 2 of them had good kind of survival checks. We said, well, you're rolling survival if you're kind of gathering rations and resources. So I would have them, and they did pretty well. There was one time where the food got a little sparse, but they were able to catch enough fish, or at least a big enough fish that they were able to eat and live off of that during their 14-day journey. So they encountered these Kuatoa, they got their fishing gear, they encountered these Miro that attacked them, and then I think the next thing that happened was that they're traveling along and they hear this big crack, and I told them, well, maybe it was a purple worm tunneling over a head that caused a shift, or perhaps it's just the tectonic plates of the world grinding against each other, but there's this big crack and huge rocks start raining down on you. So everyone had to take a dex save, and the funny thing was that if they failed, then the rocks hit them and they would take damage. If they passed, then they dodged the rocks, but instead the rocks hit the boat and potentially did damage. And so I think 2 people failed, but of the 3 people that passed, the rocks didn't do enough damage to even pass the boat's damage threshold. So the boats didn't actually take any damage beyond something superficial. So they did that. But then what was neat is, so I said, okay, so the rocks splash down and the boats are rocking back and forth from the big waves it's causing. But you notice that even after the rocks have stopped falling, the boat starts rocking back and forth even more violently. And basically these rocks had disturbed like an aquatic troll. And this troll had started rocking the boat to try and capsize it, and actually succeeded in capsizing one of their 2 boats. And this originally the encounter was supposed to be 1 troll, and trolls are nasty. Like, they have a good size hit point pool. They regenerate a decent number of hit points every turn unless you're hitting them with acid or fire, which they learned the hard way. And they get like 3 attacks apiece with and they hit hard, especially for level 3 characters. Like, it could systematically take them out one by one. But that being said, there's a good number of damage dealers in this party. There's a barbarian, there's a paladin, there's a warlock. So they can really, and the monk as well, just because the monk, puts out so many attacks per turn with his fury of blows and that kind of thing. So they rolled really well. And they almost offed the first troll in 1 round of combat, and the troll rolled really poorly for initiative, so it was going last. So it did get to regen some hit points, it did get to attack one of the characters, and it did hit fairly hard. But I was like, well, this is a little bit too easy. So I kind of on the spot augmented and had a second troll swim up and start trying to knock over the other boat, which eventually it succeeded in that as well. So then things shifted where the troll was hitting so hard, and I'm realizing in that moment that the party doesn't actually have anything to stop the regeneration. And the book specifically says that a troll is only ever actually killed if it is reduced to 0 hit points and is stopped from regenerating at its next turn. And the troll was going last. So they would hit this troll and say, okay, it's defeated. And they're like, oh, great. And they're like, well, you mean it like we killed it? And I'm like, it's defeated. It's knocked unconscious. And then the troll's turn would come along, and it would basically pull itself back up or start swimming again and start wailing on whoever was closest to it. Like, well, what are we? They're like, what do we even do? So at that moment, I started to panic because now I've thrown 2 of these things at them. I said, oh God, I've killed this party, which obviously don't want to try and do. I want it to be challenging. I don't mind if a character dies. I don't want to wipe the party at level 3 at a random encounter on the lake. So, but my characters, my party, they don't ever forget the resources available to them, which I'm very grateful for. So the bard used, I can't remember the name of the spell, but basically it was a bardic spell where he convinced, or sorry, the warlock. It was the warlock, not the bard. So Colby cast a spell which required a wisdom saving throw that the trolls are abysmal at. And I think it even had disadvantage imposed by a hex or something. But ultimately, the idea was that the troll takes a save, and if it fails, for the next 8 hours, it has to do whatever the warlock tells him, as long as it doesn't impose harm on himself or something. So, or it might have been Bard, actually, the Bard that did it. I'm getting confused now because there was another instance where the warlock used like command creature or something, and that was much different. But anyways, this troll failed, and it was told, you need to go find yourself. You need to go consider what it is to be a troll and go be philosophical somewhere for the next 8 hours. And I was like, okay, this troll has a stupid look on his face, and then when his turn comes around, he just swam off. So in essence, they one-shotted a troll in a very creative way. So I thought that was great. I wasn't upset with that, and it helped put the party back in a better position. Because this other troll, the first one that they almost destroyed in one turn, just kept getting up, and it killed the warlock's familiar, and it almost downed the party's bard and all kinds of stuff. So eventually what happened is the warlock had a great idea. Is when they had escaped Velkenvelv, they stole this bottle of like this blue syrupy liquid that they found out was like a liquor, a sweet liquor. And so the warlock says, well, I take this out, and my character, says goodbye, sweet nectar, and takes a sip, and then kind of makes a Molotov cocktail at it. I said, oh, great. And he throws it at the troll. And the troll, I said, well, it's an improvised weapon, so you don't get to add your proficiency bonus. So roll your d20, add your dex modifier. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, please let this work, because I don't know what they're going to do otherwise. And he missed. He just missed. It was just like, and you throw it at the troll, and the troll's wide-eyed and sees it, because the trolls know what is bad for them. And it sails over his head, and you hear, bloop, and the fire goes out, and it sinks. So it was really kind of anticlimactic, but a funny kind of moment. And at this point, the bard is trying to get back in the boat that the barbarian and paladin have uncapsized. And the paladin's holding on to him, and the troll knocks him unconscious. And he would have just slipped beneath the waves and started taking, like almost really seriously would have like permanently died just from drowning. But the paladin had said, I hold on to you. I clamp your hand down on the side of the boat because I'm giving you this lit torch. And that's how we're going to kill this thing. And so at that point, the troll knocks him unconscious. And they said, well, what happened to the torch? I said, well, I mean, realistically, it probably fell in the water. I was like, well, no, because maybe he was still half over the boat. I said, okay, roll a percentile die. And you have a 50-50 chance of that torch being just in the bottom of the boat as opposed to waterlogged in the Darklake. So they rolled, and they rolled well. And I said, great, you still have the torch. So the paladin says, all right, I drop my shield, and I pick up the torch, and I have a torch and my longsword, and I attack the troll with both, And so I hit him with my sword, and I hit him with the torch, and then that should hopefully do what we need to do. So he misses with his sword, of course, and the torch is only going to do like D2 damage because you're just basically poking something with a torch. But he hit with the torch. I said, oh, fantastic. So then he says, well, hold on. Can I smite with the torch? Or does it have to be a weapon that I'm proficient with? And I said, that's a really good question. I don't know. So they looked it up in the player's guide and just said, nope, just any melee attack you hit with, you can smite. So this paladin basically takes this torch and smashes it into the troll's face and then rolls a bunch of smite damage. Basically, like, cigarette into his face, and then light explodes out of it. But the funny part is that he still didn't do enough to down the troll. So now the race was on to have someone down this troll before its turn came along, because then after that it would just regain its regeneration ability. But I mean, long story short, they wound up doing it, and that was pretty fun. But one other kind of thing I wanted to note about this session that was really cool is that, and this happened during their very first encounter with the Kuo-toa, is that our Colby, the warlock, at level 3, gains a familiar with his Pact of the Chain, which is for, I don't know if it's rule-bound wise or if it's just for narrative effect, but his familiar is this little imp that's basically like not the patron saint, but like the extension of his, person where he gets his power, and has come to kind of like watch over him and guide him and that kind of thing. Now, in a lot of cases, this might be like, oh, he's there to rescue you and make sure you're doing well. But this character basically is like a borderline sexual deviant, and that's what led him into the trouble of being chained to this demon lord who grants him power, because he has a fiend as a demon lord, I believe, demon queen or something. And so his little imp's name is Poncho. And Poncho, I don't know if you've ever seen the Netflix series Growing Up, but Poncho basically has the personality of a combination of Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty and the hormone monster from Big Mouth on Netflix. And so it's this really kind of nasty, obscene little imp who is always invisible unless he attacks, kind of thing. That's how he chooses to play him. And his kind of acts as just this really poor moral compass on his character's shoulder, and is always trying to get him into trouble by making him do things that would be in accordance with the attitudes of his patron of his power. So, at one point, he pops up, and he's talking to Sir Bastion, and the imp is trying to prod him into hitting on the paladin, and the warlock says this is a terrible idea. I said, but it's a bad idea, but you may have to give in to your baser instincts as prodded by this moral compass, so take a wisdom save, and he passed it, so nothing kind of weird happened there. But here's where it gets funny, is that this imp is classified as a fiend, and he's just flying around invisible all the time. No one knows about him except for the warlock, and the warlock would like to keep it that way. It's kind of like his dirty little secret. And the paladin, when they encounter the Kuo-toa, and I say, well, they're talking to some person named Quillis you can't see, the paladin says, well, I just saw Demigorgon rise out of the water, so I would like to use Divine Sense. And so you have to tell me now the general vicinity of if there is a fiend or an undead or, a devil or something that's nearby. And he's thinking, that way I'll see if there's some kind of invisible demon in their boat. So he does it, and I say, yes, you sense a fiend. And he says, oh my God, I draw my sword, where is it? And he says, it's generally in the vicinity above Colby's head, because he's sensing Poncho. And he says, okay, I swing my sword. And I'm not rolling for initiative right now, because I said, well, just have Poncho make a dex save, and if he makes it, he just flutters up, and now it's out of your reach. And so he's like, careful, friends, there's demons about. And I was like, what the heck? And the warlock's like, Poncho, get out of here! This guy's gonna. So and then during the combat with the trolls, when the trolls killed Poncho, Poncho never dies. He just kind of gets banished and then comes back later. So after this combat, the paladin's like, I use my divine sense again, and I say, you do, and you sense nothing. And he's like, oh. Okay, good. Because the whole time he was like, this fiend is following you down the river. So that's going to be this funny dynamic down the road where the paladin is constantly sensing some kind of demon around. and doesn't know what or where it is, and the warlock's just trying to keep this secret. And what's going to be funny too is if he finds him, it'll be this continual process of sensing the imp, killing the imp coming back, rinse and repeat. So I don't know. We'll see where that goes. It's kind of funny. So they do the Kutoa, they do the Miro, they do the trolls, and then at this point they're kind of getting near the end. And Hemeth says to them, "All right, we should be able to smell, if not hear, the forges of Gracklestugh soon. So, but I should warn you that this last leg of the journey is going to be a little tricky." And the character's like, "Well, why is that?" It's like, "Well, because there's this passage we have to navigate, and it gets very tight, and we're all going to have to work together to kind of steer the boat." So he said, "Okay." So as they're going, the passage starts sinking in on them, and there's literally like just enough room to get the boats through. So the first boat goes, and it makes it through okay. The second boat goes, and it gets stuck, and it's like not chest rather, but waist high water. So I say, "Okay, well, you guys got to get out and push." So all the players in that boat kind of get out, and they're pushing the boat, and they roll well enough to free the boat. But I said, but as you're doing that, the water around you starts to fizz and bubble, and they get attacked by these creatures called they have like a really Mayan sounding name that I don't have in front of me, so I'm not going to remember how to pronounce it correctly, but it's something like Itchachitzel or something like that, which are these like demonic manta rays that are kind of patron demons of the Demogorgon. So they start attacking. There's like 8 of them. Now they're kind of Gumbies. They're not that strong. They're just the basic version. There are other versions of these things, but they're just the basic version. So it was more of a time trap than anything. They eventually fought their way, defeated them. Again, working fairly well as a team. Excuse me. Although there was an instance where the bard had put one of them to sleep, and then the monk smacked the one that they put to sleep, which woke it up. And he didn't kill it in that hit either. So they were like, "Oh, why'd you do that?" And the monk was kind of like, "Whatever, man. We're just gonna kill all these things. They're demonic. Screw them." So that's what they did. And Hemeth was actually almost put down in that scenario, but he leapt back in the boat and let the player characters do all the fighting. So they defeat these creatures in a few rounds of combat. They get the boat out, and now their 2 boats are traveling again. And they're probably at this point like maybe a day away from Gracklestugh when all of a sudden their boats hit this big sandbar, and they kind of beach themselves. And Hemeth is like, "Oh, I hate when this happens." It's like the shifting waters and rock can sometimes make these unmapped hazards, which are annoying to deal with. And he's kind of gets out of the boat and starts looking around. He says, "Okay, well, this sandbar looks like it's about 10 feet wide." And he's walking along. He says, "But it looks like it also connects over to here. And I know that passage. I know that area. So we have options. We can either kind of work to push the boats to get them unstuck and move them over the sandbar and then continue the last leg of our journey on the lake, or we can take this path here, which is by land, so maybe a bit slower, but it's also kind of a shortcut. So it's really just good luck for us that this sandbar connects there. So we can leave the boats and just hoof it. If we take the boats, we'll arrive at the Gracklestugh docks. If we walk, we'll come to the front gates. But earlier what I should say is, at the end of our last session, Hemeth had basically said, "Look, you guys rescued my life. I'm kind of honor bound to do you a favor. So if you guys want to go to Gracklestugh, I'll get you through the gates. I'll make sure it happens." So they weren't concerned about if it was the docks or the main gate. So we were at a point where 2 of the characters, 2 of the players basically said, "It's been like we've had more combats and seen more nasty things on the lake than we ever did just walking through the paths. So why don't we just hoof it and it'll be fine?" And the other 2 characters are like, "I don't know. It just sounds like it'd be better to take the boats and like we're a day away. It's, whatever. Why don't we just do that?" So the party was split 2 and 2, and it all came down to the last remaining vote because we had 5 players tonight or last night. And they said, well, perhaps Colby's contacts, like maybe the merchants are by the dock, and it says, well, you don't know. Anyways, long story short, the 5th vote was to use the boats. So I said, okay, you guys have to, do your checks to get the boats free. So they got 1 boat over the sandbar, And then the other boat, they failed, and they failed in such a way that, whether it was stuck into rocks jutting out from beneath the sandbar, or whether the hull had taken some damage and was no longer usable. Bottom line was they only had one boat. So I said, okay, your new options available to you are to either hoof it, or to have 6 people in the boat and 5 people holding onto the side of the boat, kind of swimming at the side. Well, they really didn't like that idea. And then they kind of joked around with breaking the cardinal rule of D&D, and like, oh, why don't we just split the party? We'll send all the NPCs in the boat, and we'll walk. And we all kind of chuckled at that, and I made sure they weren't serious, and then they said, okay, we're just going to walk. So they follow the sandbar into this cave where Hemeth is like, yep, all of this looks familiar, and they travel for another few hours, of the kind of, we'll say they traveled like something like 4 hours out of the necessary, 12 that they need to, get there, or something like that. And all of a sudden Hemeth says, well, hold up a second. He says, this is the way that we go. But this path here, like a Gandalf moment, I have no memory of this. This is different. I never remember this path being here. And he kind of, recants back to the sandbar and says, look, like I said, sometimes there's cave-ins, sometimes, big monsters are rampaging through the caves and open up new passages. He says, I don't know what that's all about. So we should probably just go this way. And the characters are like, okay. And then I say, and then all of you, in your mind, like mentally projected, telepathy into your mind, you hear the soft, kind of distant cry of a feminine voice. And the voice is saying, hello, is anyone there? Please help me. I've been stuck in the dark for so long. Please come help me. Right? So the characters, well, the players, I should say, are immediately suspicious. They're like, okay, so what an interesting series of events that our boats get beached, and then we walk down this path, and then there's this mysterious path and someone calling for help, right? Like, what's that about? So the characters, I guess, are a bit suspicious too. So they say, well, we're going to do some insight checks to see if, like, we feel like this is true or if this is, like, insincere what we're hearing. So what happened was actually really great, is that the barbarian and the paladin each rolled just the worst on their insight checks. And which was fine, because I want them to go down here. I think this is going to be a really cool little encounter that they're going to have. So I'm hoping that they kind of make the choice one way or another to go down there. But the paladins basically rolled like a natural 1 or something and just said, well, I'm a paladin. I hear a woman crying out for help. I'm going to help her. And then our barbarian, by the name of Bard, his backstory is that the little village he grew up in, he was the only half-orc. And he was raised by humans, but because he's so big and strong, he was basically like the village folk hero. He was the one to drive off bandits and everything. So he kind of has some of that courageous streak to him as well, and also failed the test. And so the character's player is a girl, and she says, "Yeah, I also hear this person calling for help, so we should go." And then the other characters, basically, no matter what they rolled, it was like, yeah, you don't see anything. There's no real malcontent. So I said, okay, well, I guess we're going down this passage to rescue whoever is pleading for our help, because it's the heroic right thing to do. And I said, okay, great. And that's where we'll call it tonight. And they were like, oh, well, can we know at least what was? And I'm like, nope, that's the cliffhanger. That's it. That's where we're going to pick up next time, is you guys will kind of see who is asking for your help and what kind of adventures and perils that leads to, and that's what we'll do. So that's where we ended the session off, and so next time we'll be starting out with that, and then like I said, I can't see that that won't take up a whole lot of time. It'll be fun. I think it might take up maybe a quarter of the session, just the little encounter that's in store for them. Excuse me. But then after that, they'll kind of continue on the way to Gracklestugh, and then things are going to get really interesting. Because up until now, in terms of places of populace within the Underdark, they've been in Valkenvelv, which is basically just a prison outpost. Not really much to do there other than to escape and interact with their current little band of NPCs, which I should note, hey, today is the first session of all of the sessions where they didn't lose a single NPC. So good on the party. Good for them. And then the second place they got to was Sloopludaw, which was a village. I think the book says the population of Sloopludaw is like 500 Kuatoa. And like, okay, they're all nutty fish people anyways, and there's just like a crazy fishing village filled with religious zealots. Or religious zealots. And so there wasn't much there. But Gracklestugh is like a major city, like a known city. It's the city of blades because it's just like the city is constantly lit with the forges as they kind of churn out armor and arms, and that's why it's called the City of Blades. So that's going to be really neat, and I think the book says that Gracklestugh has a population of like 10,000. And that's just the Duergar that live there. There's also like 2,000 Darrow, which are kind of like the smaller, crazier, lankier version of a dwarf, of a deep dwarf, I should say. And then like an untold number of slaves, because they're a slave-based community, or a slave-based race or industry or whatever. So it's going to be their first like major city, and there's a lot in Gracklestugh. Like Gracklestugh, the characters will probably be there for maybe even 3 entire sessions just in Gracklestugh. So I'm really excited for it because there's a lot of cool stuff that happens there and that can happen there. So yeah, so that was our 4th session. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. There's a couple things I wanted to throw out at the end that I think I don't know if I've mentioned them maybe the very first time and really hadn't mentioned them since, because I'm just so excited to do this. I just enjoy doing it, and I enjoy having you guys watch and getting some of the feedback. As always, I'll appreciate if you subscribe to the channel and kind of continue on with the adventures of my party in the Underdark. I'm starting to throw up some additional types of videos as well, such as unboxing videos. We're going to be doing a review video soon, and because I'd mentioned before, I'm one of the owners of the local hobby store here in North Bay, Ontario. It's called North Bay Games and Hobbies, and so I want to start doing more of that stuff. So if you subscribe, you'll get notifications on all those videos. I appreciate the likes. If you have comments or questions, I appreciate you posting those. I'd love to do the interaction, whether you're people who live around me and that I talk to on a regular basis, or whether you're just someone watching and you'd like to post. That's phenomenal. So yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week on Dungeon Master Journal Out of the Abyss. Thanks.